Emanuel Datt from Datt Capital is up next with a chat about Niobium and a high conviction small cap stock pick for 2025. But first, we began by speaking about his belief in the potential of the small cap universe and resources in particular over the next 12 months.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Nadine. I find the small cap space very interesting to invest in, primarily due to the return potential and also the real excitement in identifying companies that can start off small but become significantly large over time. And it's a great, and investors can benefit immeasurably compared to larger cap stocks.
Yeah, so what are you primarily looking for in a small cap company to start? I know that is a big question, but is it something particularly unique about its business model, or is it, that, as you just referenced, ultimate potential to become a blue chip one day?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think every sort of opportunity is unique. I think that at a higher level, we all want to find companies that, or one commonality, I guess, is the growth potential in the company itself, in terms of the fundamentals of the business itself and all the various catalysts that can occur to improve the fundamental outlook for the business. I think that's the number one commonality. But I would also say that growth companies can come from any sector, which is a really important nuance to understand. And I think that sectors like technology, biotech, resources, these are sort of sectors which we found pretty prospective for small cap hunting in the past, and will continue to do so, no doubt.
Yeah, well, let me, I guess, toot your horn, because Datt Capital's small companies strategy has returned about 20% per annum, and it's not that old, in fact, in terms of its time being available to investors. So how do you protect investors from the downside with that strategy?
Yeah, I think, the simplest way is to ensure that the businesses that you're looking at investing in are fundamentally sound, both from a balance sheet perspective and in terms of the value they provide to customers. Ultimately, it can be as simple as that, but also, having a good understanding of the management team and what they're trying to achieve and whether it's realistic is another very important factor behind it. It really can be distilled down to these three elements. Of course, there are many nuances in these three factors, but it all distills down to these three effectively.
Now, I know that your high conviction pick for 2025 comes from the resources, the mining sector. It's an interesting sort of pick because, the last 12 months has not been that kind if you think about the price of iron ore, the price of coal. So in your view, does some of the pressure that we've seen in parts of the resources complex mean that we'll likely see an increase in prices, to come?
Yeah, well, I think it's an interesting question. As you mentioned, commodities across the board have been fairly soft. But what that does is, in my mind, is it actually impedes new supply from coming on, or discourages it at the very least. And I think that it's the commodity space is a very broad sector in itself. There are many, many different commodities. You mentioned iron ore and coal, I think. So even there are many nuances even amongst these broad big bulk commodities. And I think that's the challenge, but also the fun in trying to determine what particular commodity picks or exposures may be best.
Yeah, well, you like fun, I like fun, but I know that you do a lot of research when it comes to the stocks that you ultimately invest in. And your high conviction pick for 2025, I hope you don't mind me stealing your thunder, is WA1 Resources. It's an ASX listed resource company obviously. So what does it do, Emanuel?
Yeah, so WA1, it's effectively discovered the world's best undeveloped niobium deposit located in Western Australia, the world's best mining jurisdiction. And one huge attraction for us is niobium itself, which is the mineral they've discovered. It's an extraordinarily scarce commodity, and that means but it's highly critical within the steel industry and in the energy transition as well, incidentally. But the commodity price itself, of niobium's price itself, has remained remarkably stable just due to the supply constraints, and has actually grown quite steadily over, let's say, a period of the past 10 years. So I think that's a very attractive characteristic, in the sense that you have a lot of price stability in the commodity price, in contrast to those you mentioned.
So niobium, it's valuable, it's rare. I understand there are only about 3 current niobium mining operations globally. So that really must set WA1 Resources up well. I mean, is there a race to discover, to explore, to commercialize this niobium?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this, or WA1, represents the sort of first significant niobium discovery in 70 years of exploration, incidentally. So, it's a compound that's extraordinarily hard to find. When it is present, it has to be present in the right sort of rocks to be extracted commercially. And, WA1 seems to have all these very prospective elements that, to us, it tells us that there's a very high probability of this being a commercial resource in time. So very interesting.
Yeah. Okay. So it's recently updated its mineral resource. So is that alluding to the fact that this discovery in WA is actually bigger, more significant, more prospective than initially had been anticipated?
Yeah, absolutely. Investing in, junior explorers is always, something that is fraught with uncertainty, I would say. We thought that the resource would be good, but, the maiden resource estimate, which was about 200 million tonnes at a grade of 1% niobium, just blew our socks off, essentially, and clearly catapulted the deposit into, effectively the world's second best niobium deposit in existence, and the best uncommercialized deposit that I mentioned a bit earlier on. So, I think it's something that's incredibly valuable. It is still being delineated in terms of, in the sense that the company haven't quite defined the extent of the resource itself. So we are expecting it to grow going forward. And, a new estimate could be delivered at some time this year, which I think will be provide a lot more information and to investors and onlookers.
I guess, Emanuel, one of the questions is, it's one thing to find this resource, it's another thing to get it out of the ground and commercialize it. You mentioned that WA is obviously one of the best mining jurisdictions in the world, but maybe you could speak to us a little bit about why you are expecting favorable economics from this resource in particular.
A number of factors that are very favorable. You've got a very stable sort of mining-friendly jurisdiction. You also have the availability of skilled mining labor, which is very important, ultimately. And it's also in a fairly remote area in the middle of the desert, which means there are probably fewer environmental factors that need to be considered, or competing land uses as well, which is an important part of, mineral economics, if you would. But then again, the commodity price, or the price of niobium itself, is extremely high. it's sort of in the region of about $45,000 a ton, which is incredibly valuable, meaning that the remote location itself isn't a huge impediment, given the very, very high value nature of the commodity that can be produced. It's an extremely attractive opportunity in our view, just using, back one below numbers.
And it's on the critical minerals list. I understand here, I'm sure elsewhere. Maybe you could clarify that for us. But in your view, does that mean that we could also potentially be seeing some sort of government funding, government support for the project?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe it's in the top 3 of most critical minerals lists in all Western jurisdictions, basically. So the US, the EU, the UK, Australia. It's listed as a critical resource, or mineral, I should say. And I think that niobium is being, I guess, uses are being found in future-looking industries, things like battery technology, for instance, where the inclusion of niobium in batteries has been incorporated in fast-charging battery technology. So if EV penetration rates are to increase over time, fast-charging technology is fundamentally going to increase that penetration rate, but also areas like defense, space technologies, and there's a whole long trail of various uses where the incorporation of niobium into various devices and technologies can really extend the potential of what's available today. So very important, and we think the governments all over the world will be looking to assist with the commercialization of this resource over time.
The company itself, WA1 Resources, has, at the end of last quarter, $86.5 million in cash. You're the expert, but it seems very robust to me for a small cap exploration company. So what sort of confidence does that instill as for you as an investor?
Yeah, sure. So I think that, looking at the quarterly report, 86 million in the bank, that will provide probably about 2.5 years of funding by our sort of rough calculations. I think it puts the company in a remarkably strong position, and I don't see the company needing to come back to markets for some time in terms of raising additional capital. I think that it's very well financed and equipped to pursue feasibility studies, which will sort of demonstrate the initial economics of the projects, or potential economics, I should say. So I think there's actually, a lot of catalysts on the horizon this calendar year, which will really sort of demonstrate the immense strategic value of this asset, essentially. And it's to be seen whether the company gets into, things like strategic partnerships or offtake agreements with various counterparties. That would be another interesting catalyst should it eventuate.
Well, I think that segues really nicely into our first viewer question, which has come from Andrew. He says the quarterly update implies there could be an improved resource estimate later in the first half, which I think you alluded to too, Emanuel. Andrew's asking, could this be a share price catalyst?
Yeah, I would say so. I believe that the company had been quite focused on improving the confidence level of their maiden mineral resource estimate. So I would expect to see an update to that at a higher level of confidence that would basically provide the foundation for the feasibility studies with attached economics. So I think it very much could be a strong share price catalyst. No doubt.
And Jan has written in as well. Thank you, Jan, to say, what about takeover potential for your small cap strategy? Do you factor this into assumptions for the likes of WA1 Resources and the like?
Yes, absolutely. I think that ultimately, with takeovers, any sort of company or counterparty that's looking to take over a company or an asset has to see value first and foremost. So working backwards, we sort of obviously have a valuation in mind for WA1 Resources, and presently, the market values it at a significant discount to our own internal estimates. So I very much think that it could be a takeover target, just looking at our numbers. And it would be it has all the elements, I think, of an attractive takeover target, in the sense of having, exposure to a commodity which is extraordinarily rare and strategic, but also has the potential for a very, very long life of mine. We're sort of expecting that under the current mineral resource estimate, it provides us a life of mine of, over 100 years potentially, depending on the scale of the operation. So, that's a very, very, substantial resource, and it could even belong in the hands of a major, for instance.
Okay, so that leads me to my final question, which will be on strategy, because WA1 Resources has been listed since 2022. It returned 30% in 2024. If you don't mind, how long have you been invested, and what type of a time horizon do you have in mind when it comes to WA1 Resources?
Yeah, sure. So we basically invested first took an investment in the company about 6 months post IPO, which is when they sort of had their first significant sort of discovery holes from out of the resource. And we've sort of built up our position over time and have done very well out of it. And I think that a real attraction with this company is that the management team do hold about 30% of the company, which really aligns their interests with other shareholders ultimately. So I think that's a very important part of the thesis as well. And we look forward to seeing what they can deliver into this calendar year.